Okay, so in this video, we are going to be taking a look at the lipids, but first we will just focus on the triglycerides. Okay, so showing you the video right now. So lipids are, again, just to summarize, these are insoluble materials, insoluble organic materials that you can find in biological systems, and they are used for energy storage, protection, insulation, lubrication, as hormone precursors, and as cell membranes. So there are four subtypes of lipids: triglycerides, phospholipids, steroids, and waxes. All of them are insoluble in water, right? And the first thing that we are going to focus on is the triglyceride. So from the name itself, triglyceride, so it has to do with three things: three, and glyceride. So it has to be based off of some thing. So triglycerides are fats and oils. Fats are, obviously, they can be solid at room temperature. Oils are liquid at room temperature. Usually they are found in plants. Fats are in animals. And a triglyceride is like this: you have a glycerol molecule and three fatty acids. Okay, but sir, what is a glycerol? A glycerol is just a 3-carbon organic molecule with three hydroxyl groups. So it's an alcohol, but it's a trialcohol, because you have an alcohol group here, alcohol group here, an alcohol group here, and that is a glycerol. And how about the fatty acid? So before we can discuss, therefore understand triglyceride, you have to understand what a fatty acid is. So a fatty acid is just a hydrocarbon chain, right? And that hydrocarbon chain, obviously, has to have a methyl group on one end, because, well, this one has 4 bonds, right? So one bond is spent to connect with this carbon, the other bond is used to connect to that carbon. So therefore you have 2 bonds to spare, and the filler element is always hydrogen. But on the end, obviously, there's no other carbon, because that's the last carbon. So it has to have a third hydrogen, unlike here where you have only 2 hydrogens. So that is the methyl group. That's the hydrocarbon chain. And then the other end of that is a carboxyl group, which is C double bonded to O, single bonded to OH. And that carboxyl group makes this a fatty acid. So when you have a hydrocarbon chain with a carboxyl group on one end, that's a fatty acid, right? However, fatty acids could be two of the two things. They could be saturated, meaning all of the bonds are single bonds in the chain. Obviously here you have a double bond, but that's not part of the criteria. The criteria is the the backbone, right? Single bonds in the backbone. But you can also have fatty acids which have double bonds in the backbone, and that makes this unique, because when you have a double bond, you see, this has to have 4 bonds. So if it has spent 2 bonds, so this is, by the way, this is a mistake in the part of the video, which is not my own. This is a video that I harvested from YouTube. But this should not be here, because remember, carbon can only create 4 bonds: 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is really should not be there. So just erase this. This is a mistake that probably the creator of this video did not notice, but I noticed it. We thought we didn't notice, we wouldn't notice, but we did. That's an Avengers meme for you. But anyways, so what happens is, because this H and that H would repel, so it creates a bend. So again, emphasize that for you. If this was the case, right, these two will repel each other. These two will also repel each other, but they have no choice, because they repel this. They would repel, causing this to bend like that, but these two will also repel, causing it to bend like that. So in total, they won't bend. But when you have this, they repel, but there's no counter H's at the bottom to repel them back to the straight configuration. So when they repel, they will bend, and that causes this fatty acid to bend. So it has a bend, it has a kink. So unsaturated fatty acids has bends in them, right? So when you have saturated fatty acids and they form triglycerides, they form fat. But if the fatty acids are composed of unsaturated ones and they form a triglyceride, they form oils. Okay? So that's how you connect how come there are two kinds, oils and fats, and both of them are triglycerides. So both of them are triglycerides, but the fat contains saturated fatty acids. The oils contains unsaturated fatty acids, right? And another thing that have come because of technology is the trans fatty acids. So trans fatty acids is this. If you notice, the H's are on opposite sides, right? And again, what does that mean? In the first case, the H's are on the same side, right? And again, these two will repel, causing them to bend. So these will bend. But if you have the H's on opposite sides, right? Opposite sides, these two might repel, causing this to bend like that, but causing this so bend like that. But remember, you can have also H's here. So as a result, these two will never repel each other because they are on opposite sides. So guess what? They have straight. They have a straight configuration. It's not bending. Now, this is one thing that the video did not emphasize, but I will emphasize, and that is when you have a straight chain, right? Such as the saturated fatty acids. When you have a straight chain, let's say you put that in a box. If you have straight chain, so you can put in 5 of them in one box. But if you have bends, it's difficult because if it's bending like that, 1, 2, 3, now you can't fit in the fourth and the fifth one because of all the bends. The bend consumes space, right? So again, if you have straight chain, it's easy to organize them and they can save space. Not a lot of space is wasted. But if you have bends, then now you cannot, let's say you can just accommodate 4. You cannot now have the fifth one because of all the bends. So what I'm trying to say is here, you can pack more into less space. So what does that mean? More mass in less space, it's more dense. But if you have bends, you can pack in less of that in the same space, so therefore it will be less dense. Okay? And more dense, less dense. Remember our pattern for solids, liquids, and gases? Liquids will always be more dense than gases, and solids will always be more dense than liquids. Obviously, there are examples like water. Water is actually less dense when it's in solid form than when it's in liquid form, but generally speaking, in other molecules, this is the pattern. So notice if it is a saturated thing, it's straight. You can pack in more, it's more dense, so therefore it becomes solid. But if it's unsaturated, it has a lot of bends. You cannot pack more stuff in the same space, so it's less dense. So therefore it is liquid. Okay? Now, this one is solid. So when it's solid, it solidifies in your system also. And this is not clear. There are some debates about this, but this is the basis for some people saying that it's bad to consume a lot of fats because fats have saturated ones which create more dense particles which create solid particles. These solid particles clog up your arteries, right? But unsaturated ones like oils from vegetables, for example, are less dense. They are liquid, and therefore they don't clog your arteries. So that's why in some health circles, fats is always less healthy. Again, this is debatable, but again, this is the basis for why they say I'm just telling you what what their basis is. I'm not saying that this is true. And as a matter of fact, I'm not really sure because the literature, especially in health, is a little bit all over the place. Some say that this is really the cause. Some say no, it's not. But again, the biology of a human being is so complicated that it's so difficult to point out. But the reasons for why they say it like that fats are less healthy than oils, that's why you should eat vegetable based food than animal based food, is because of this, that fats create solid particles that can clog up your arteries, but oils do not, right? However, it's not as straightforward as that, as you may have learned from science by now. It's not as straightforward like that, because from the perspective of chemical reactions, from the perspective of chemical reactions, when we look at fatty acids, the saturated fatty acids, all of the bonds are single. Sorry, I'm not showing my screen. All of the bonds are single bonds. And as a rule of thumb, single bonds are more stable than double bonds, than triple bonds. So single bonds are stronger than double bonds. So the problem, therefore, is with unsaturated fatty acids, you have double bonds. So if you have double bonds, there is some more reactivity. It's more reactive than single bonds, right? And more reactivity means it could react with radical oxygen in your system, for example, and can cause all myriad of biomolecular pathways that sometimes could be less healthy for you, right? But the point is, because we have been consuming these fatty acids ever since we evolved, guess what? We evolved with them. So my point is, even if unsaturated fatty acids has double bonds that are technically more reactive, we have evolved with them. So we have built up systems to deal with these things. So that's why, even if from the perspective of bonds, this has more reactions, so therefore not more stable and we need stability, it's still more healthy than that. Again, because we have learned to live with them, we have evolved with them. Now comes the trans fats. Okay? These trans fats are a new thing. This is not found in nature. We have not evolved to deal with trans fatty acids. So what I'm trying to say is these trans fatty acids, they do not occur in nature. We have invented them when we discovered that we can bubble, that we can hydrogenate things. So hydrogenated things create trans fatty acids. And the bad thing with trans fatty acids is they get the worst of both worlds. What do I mean by that? In terms of density, are bad because they are more dense and they become solid, they clog up your arteries, right? Oils are better because they are liquid, so they don't clog up your arteries. But in terms of reactivity, these oils have double bonds which are more reactive, so therefore are less stable than these fats. And so in terms of unforeseen reactions, you could have more unforeseen reactions with this and that. So it's, in terms of that, this is better than that. But again, because we have evolved over time, even if this has some downsides, which are the double bonds, we can still deal with it. Trans fatty acids are bad because, number one, they form a straight chain, right? Because these two don't repel anymore, so they form a straight chain. So when they form a straight chain, guess what? Same narrative. Straight chain, you can pack in more for less space. It's more dense, it's solid, it can clog up your arteries. Plus, it has double bonds. And if it has double bonds, again, it can be more reactive. You can have more side chain reactions that are unforeseen. And because we did not evolve to deal with trans fatty acids, it's more dangerous for us, right? So think of it as the trans fatty acids get the worst of both worlds, the worst aspects of saturated fats, saturated fatty acids, and the worst aspects of the unsaturated fatty acids. They combine that trans fat. And again, it's not natural. We did not evolve to deal with trans fatty acids. So that's the idea. So when you now create the triglyceride, you have three fatty acids, and again, it could be that all of the three fatty acids are saturated, such as what is shown in the video. All of them are saturated. It could be that all of them are unsaturated, or it could be that one is saturated, the other two are unsaturated. So it could be a combination of both. But for sure, if it's all saturated, then when you form a triglyceride, you form fat, right? And for sure, when it's all unsaturated, you will form oils, right? When it's a combination of both, like one is saturated, the other two are not saturated, it depends on the overall property of the triglyceride. It could be a fat or it could be an oil. But the idea is like that. And again, it's the same thing. When you bond them together, guess what? This OH has to go, this H has to go so that they can combine. So therefore, H and OH, you form water here, H and OH, you form water here, H and OH, you form water here. So when you form a triglyceride, therefore, you form three molecules of water, right? And again, that is dehydration synthesis that was discussed in the unifying concepts, right? So that's the idea. So now we go into phospholipid. Now the next topic is the phospholipid. So I will stop here because this has been so long already. But what I would want to emphasize is this idea that again, the fatty acids could be saturated and unsaturated. And depending on whether it's saturated or unsaturated, you could have a case where the particle has bends, and that bends depends the dictates the density and could dictate whether something is liquid and solid. And solid means bad in one sense because it can clog up your arteries, but also better in another sense because it has stable bonds, right? Which means less unforeseen reactions. For unsaturated ones, it's liquid, so it doesn't clog up your arteries, but it has double bonds that radicals could attack and create unforeseen reactions. But again, it's less of a threat because we have evolved to kind of deal with them. Trans fat is bad because it gets the worst of both worlds. It gets the solid form of the saturated fatty acids, which could cause your arteries to clog up, and it has the double bonds of the unsaturated fatty acids, which could cause unforeseen reactions. Plus, because we have not evolved with trans fatty acids are an invention when we discovered hydrogenation. So it's we say that it's more dangerous for us to consume trans fatty acids. So everything that is hydrogenated, especially if it's fully hydrogenated oil or something like that, it has a lot of trans fat. So you should be careful with that. So that is it for this video about triglyceride. In the next video, we will be discussing phospholipids, steroids, and waxes.